Okay, 26 is a fairly quick question to do. Here we've got a twin pack. Each item is 25% off. Let's imagine each item costs £100. After the deal, this would go down to 75 and 75. In total, therefore, we've gone from 200 to 150. Now, looking through our answer options, that is exactly the same as buying one, the 100, and getting the second one half price for 50. That's because we've got two lots of 25% or one lot of 50%. That's the same thing. So A is the correct answer here. So question 27 is all about someone who's got a bit of a chip on their shoulder about local government. We're told about people being sort of open-minded towards local government, but actually we're told that they don't have the interest of the population at heart, when actually we need these things like wind farms and fracking and solar power units. We need to make decisions on a much larger scale that's beneficial for everyone. So this person is essentially, the main conclusion is that local politics doesn't always work. So let's go through each of the answer options. A, people's suspicions of big centralised governments are understandable. Well, yes, this author does allude to that, but that's not the main reason why they're writing. So that's not the answer here. People will always choose to protect their local interests over those of the wider group. Well, again, although he alludes to that, that's not really the point. They're sort of saying that, okay, local politics has its benefits, but actually it has some drawbacks as well. It's a much broader argument. On top of that, this always is a bit misleading. I never like to pick things that are that definite. So overall, B, I'd veer away from. C, it's typically local groups that campaign to prevent new developments from happening. But again, although the author mentions this, it's sort of in passing. It's not their main argument. D, highly localised politics is not the way to solve the problems our political system faces. This is overarching. It's capturing everything that the author is saying, and actually it's addressing their problem with local politics, saying that actually it can't solve these problems that the political system faces. So overall, D is our correct answer. And just to deal quickly with E, ensuring that each small group wins its own local battle means that everyone ultimately loses. Well, again, it's not really everyone. I don't like the definite aspect. Sometimes the local people would probably benefit, but in the end, sort of if you look at the average population, then it's not very good. In this case, we're talking about everyone, which is a bit too definite for me. So that's why D is a better answer. Now, question 28, the passage is essentially saying that although this sort of Energy Star program is benefiting some companies, it's still having an environmental benefit and therefore is a positive program. It's essentially saying that although we have to deal with the companies getting some extra profit, that's actually a byproduct, and actually the main outcome is still being achieved. So essentially it's saying as long as the main outcome is achieved, it doesn't matter who benefits in the process. Now let's look through the answer options and see which one mimics the principle, and we can circle that, used here. A, unless a firm makes fair pay and good conditions a top priority, it cannot be judged as a good employer. That's not really anything to do with the principle that's being used here. Awards should be only given to individuals or organisations that intentionally put the good of others before their own advantage. That's the opposite of what this author is saying. He's saying that no, awards should be given based on the end outcome, not necessarily the who wins and loses in between. So B is incorrect because it's the opposite of what the author is saying. C, reductions in expenditure on some public services should be welcomed if the result is more money for schools and hospitals. Well, no, that's not exactly what it's saying, because that's a direct trade-off. What this person's saying is that if you put some money in, it doesn't matter if some of it goes to public companies or private companies, as long as it ends up achieving its outcome, then that's fine. It's not about this trade-off opportunity cost that's represented in C. D, research into drugs that maximise the profit of big pharmaceutical companies is desirable if the result is that more lives are saved. This is the principle. It's saying that we should put money into these things. Who cares whether big pharma benefits, because it will have an end outcome that we want. So again, it's the same as this environmental policy that's being addressed here. So D is the principle that's being used. And finally, just to deal with E, longer prison sentences should be imposed on the criminal minority for the benefits of the large majority of citizens who are law-abiding. Again, it's neither here nor there. It's not talking about putting money into a service that may benefit some people, but actually has the end outcome that we all desire. That's not really being addressed by E. So D is the correct answer here. Now, question 29 is actually an interesting ethical argument. It's talking about the morality of torture and whether it's moral to torture one person in order to benefit the lives of many others. It's essentially a consequentialist point of view. It's saying that only the consequences matter. It doesn't matter whether we breach certain principles torturing this person, whether it's completely inhumane, we can do whatever we like as long as the consequences down the line are justified. And therefore it's a form of utilitarianism. And I would encourage you to look up that if you haven't come across it already. Now in this case, we can go through the answer options, which is an underlying assumption. Well, actually, the only one that sort of makes sense is this consequentialist assumption that the moral status of an action is determined by its consequences. If that wasn't the case, then clearly it would be really bad to torture this person, because if the consequences didn't matter, then who really cares? You're just torturing someone in front of you. Therefore, this whole argument hinges on the fact that it's the consequences, the amount of lives overall saved, that is the important thing. So C is the assumption here. Question 30 is another one of these annoying back calculation time things. So here, I would always encourage you to start at the end and work your way backwards. We're told that she wants to catch the 13:45 bus home after working from the shop. Now it takes 5 minutes to get to that bus stop from the shop, so she must have to leave the shop at 13:40. Now she wants to work 4 hours in this shop, so that must mean that she starts at 9:40. Now if she starts at 9:40, then which bus does she have to get? Well, remember that the bus sets off on the hour and every half hour from her home, and it takes 20 to 30 minutes to get there. So she must have to set off at 9 a.m. If she set off at 9:30, it would simply be too late. She'd get there about 9:50 or 10 a.m. and that would be too late. She wouldn't get her full 4 hours before she has to leave. So she has to get the 9 a.m. bus. That must mean that she has to set off from her home at 8:55, because remember it takes her 5 minutes to walk to that bus stop on her end as well. So overall the answer here is 8:55. Now here we have someone who wants to buy 10 tickets for a Saturday performance, so we can instantly ignore all of the other rows and just focus in on that Saturday. So we're just looking at this Saturday row over here. Now in this case, it's all about experimentation. Let's start with 250. How could we possibly spend that amount? Well, if we spent 10 tickets at 20, we'd spend 200. If we bought 10 tickets at 30, we'd spend 300. So 250 must mean that our 10 tickets spans these two groups. In other words, if we got 5 lots of 20, that's 100, and 5 lots of 30, that's 150, we would end up with 250. And that's entirely possible if you caught the back end of this group and then ended up leaking into this group. So 250 is entirely possible. What isn't possible is 275. The reason is, again, because we're lying between these two groups. If we bought 10 at 20, we're in $200 total. If we bought 10 at 30, we're in $300 total. So 275 implies that we've got some sort of mixture of these two. But wait, hang on a second. How did we get the 75? How did we end up with this 5 at the end here? Because clearly we've only got sets of 10. And that's why 275 is instantly incorrect, and hopefully you'll be able to instantly pick that one out. You don't need to start experimenting with different quantities. Maybe I got 7 of these and 3 of these, or maybe I got 6 of these and 4 of these. Any way you do it, you're not going to be ending up with a 5 at the end there. So B is instantly incorrect. Now you can absolutely carry on working through and show that all of these are the ones work. For example, 300 is simply 10 lots of 30. 325 is simply a mixture of 30 and 35, 5 of each. And finally, 350 is clearly 10 lots of 35. So overall, all of them work apart from 275, and that's why that one is our correct answer. Moving on to question 32. Now question 32 is all about optimization. The first thing I want you to do is to look at this table and work out which deal is better value for money. Now in this case, comparing these three rows, we can make one important conclusion. If we look at the 50 and the 60 centimetre lengths, we're getting 10 centimetres for every pound that we spend. The 50 centimetres is £5, the 60 centimetres is £6. The 30 centimetres, however, should be £3, but it's not, it's £4. It's ripping us off. So the 30 centimetre ribbon length is actually comparatively more expensive. So wherever possible, we want to avoid the 30 centimetre ribbon length. Okay, so we're looking specifically at the 50 and the 60 centimetres. They're going to be our bread and butter, and if we have to, then we can use the 30 centimetres, but only if we have to. The other important conclusion to make is that there are two parts to each ribbon. Now, absolutely, we can combine these and say, okay, 12 centimetres and 7 centimetres, that's the same as 19 centimetres, so I'm just going to treat it as 19 centimetres. The issue with that approach, though, is that you're going to be left with a lot of wastage. So if you, for example, look at the 30 centimetres, if you're dealing with 19 centimetres of material, then you're wasting 11 centimetres. If you're looking at the 50 centimetres, then maybe you could do 19 times 2, that's 38. Maybe you could even add another one on if you really wanted to. But ultimately, the wastage is going to be quite high from that approach because we've got annoyingly 19 centimetres. What's a better approach is to treat these individually. So first, let's focus on the 12 centimetres. Now, looking at this table over here, you should instantly sort of feel an affinity towards the 60 because 12 and 60, they work kind of nicely. We know that 12 centimetres can go nicely into sets of 5 to get 60 centimetres. So let's put that down. We can have 5 lots of 12, that gives us one lot of 60 material. We can then order another set of 5 lots of 12, another 60 material. Now at this stage we've got 2 lots of 5, that's 10. So we need an extra 4 more in order to make up our 14 decorations. Now in this case we could go absolutely for another set of 60 ribbon length, but actually 4 lots of 12 is 48. Therefore we can use our 50 centimetre because that will give us better value and actually less wastage. So overall, in order to cater for the 12 centimetre long parts of the ribbon, we need 2 lots of this 60 centimetre length, that's £12, plus 1 lot of this 50 centimetre length, that's £5. So overall, it'll cost us £17. Now let's deal with the other half of this, which is this 7 centimetre long. Remember, we need 14 lots of it. Now instantly, again, you should look at this 50 centimetres because 7 lots of 7 is 49. That's very close to 50, so we may as well go with the 50 centimetre gold ribbon length. And remember, we need 2 lots of that because we've got 14 decorations in total. So that means that we need 2 lots of this 50 material. So 2 lots of 5, that's £10. So the cheapest possible is this £17 plus this £10, and that gives us our answer of B, which is £27. Now the key to this question was realising that we're trying to minimise wastage. And in order to do that, we need to exclude using this 30 centimetre gold ribbon length altogether because it's not going to be very helpful. And actually splitting these up into its 2 separate parts, that's the reason they've given us to it in 2 separate parts, in order to allow us to really closely approximate these gold ribbon lengths. The 12 fits perfectly into this 60, the 7 fits almost perfectly with 49 into 50. Already we can feel within ourselves that's going to lead to very little wastage and therefore will probably be the most efficient solution. And remember, it doesn't matter whether we use the 50 centimetre or the 60 centimetre because they're both the same value for money. Each time we're getting 10 centimetres for £1. Moving on to question 33. Here we're talking about surgery and medicine, and actually this person is saying that we shouldn't do anything more because actually any further advances would be costing lots of money that only the most rich of us could afford, and therefore it's not worthwhile trying to advance surgery and medicine. Looking therefore at the main conclusions, we can see that actually looking through them, medical process has achieved great benefits. That's not really what we're talking about. Work on developing new medical and surgical treatments should now cease. That is what we're talking about, because they're saying that we should stop that because we need to be spending more money elsewhere, because there's no point researching more because only the most rich will be able to afford it. So B is correct. And looking through the remaining ones, any new medicines and new surgical procedures which are developed will cost too much. Well, it's not necessarily about cost. It just means the cost benefit has been reduced. So that's a bit too specific, and the author's more talking about the cost benefit analysis, which is why B is a better answer. D, no country can now afford to give total medical care to all its people. Again, we're not talking about any country or all countries. It's a bit exaggerative, so D is incorrect. And E, the prolongation of old age is not a benefit. Well, no, clearly it is a benefit for some. In this case, it's the benefit for the rich who can afford to be healthy in old age. So E is incorrect. Now let's do question 34. Here we're talking about the publishing rights of Facebook, Google, and whether they should be classed as a publisher, and if so, whether they should get certain restrictions placed on them as a result. Now this person is essentially saying, well, publishers have these restrictions, Facebook and Google, etc. are not publishers, therefore they shouldn't have restrictions. It's treating it in a very black and white way, when clearly a common sense person would say, hang on a second, the flaw in that argument is that you could have some of the restrictions. It's not an all or nothing thing. You can apply some restrictions to some things. You can try and tailor it, maybe implement an ethical obligation in there, etc., etc. Looking therefore at the answers which expresses the flaw to the best of the ability that we just said, A is clearly the most correct. The fact that social media operators are not classified as publishers does not mean that they cannot have some of the same responsibilities. That's clearly the flaw, because this author is saying, well, they're not publishers, therefore they can't have any responsibility. Whereas the reality is that they're not publishers, but they could have some of the responsibility. So A is the correct answer here. Here we have another principles style question. I'm going to write it out in ABC format as well. There are countless ways to get rich in this world. Those who do not achieve wealth either do not find it important or simply have bad luck. So if we take A as being wealth, there are two ways this might happen. Either they don't find it important, or they simply have had bad luck. Now in this case, we're told that Jane is poor, so she hasn't got any wealth, but she's always valued material goods, so she can't have B. So therefore she must have been unlucky. Now let's look at which of these parallels that reasoning. Anyone can become prosperous by working hard, so prosperous by working hard. Tom is not wealthy, so he must not have been working hard. Well, there's not this dual aspect to it, so A is incorrect. There are numerous ways to become famous. Among others, one can learn to play a musical instrument very well, study to become a world-class scientist, or just upload funny pictures. Well, hang on, we don't have a D option. There's not a third option here, so therefore B is incorrect. C, to make a cake sweet, one can either use sugar or honey. So sweetness, sugar, honey. This cake is not sweet because it was made with neither sugar nor honey. So both B and C are incorrect in C. Therefore, this principle is not being upheld, so C is incorrect. D, two paths lead to the lake. So lead to the lake. One through the forest and another through the mountain. You must, if we rephrase that the other way around so it's clearer, there are two ways to get to the lake. One through the forest and another through the mountain. You must have arrived by the forest route because you were not on the mountain route. Clearly that is mimicking the logic. We're given two alternatives. One of them has been ruled out, and that leaves only the other one as an explanation of how we got to the lake. So D is the correct answer here. And finally, if we take E, it takes a lot of luck to win the lottery. I've never won the lottery, so I must not have been lucky. Overall, that doesn't have this dichotomy of answers here, so therefore E is incorrect. Now, question 36 is a fairly straightforward mathematical question. We just have to keep our wits about ourselves. They've given us a diagram for a reason, so let's use it, let's think about it. Now, we're told that we've got this area with this brick border in grey around the edge. We're asked how many bricks and paving slabs do we need total for the patio. So let's look at this central part first because that's the most difficult. This central part has dimensions which are being eaten into on both sides by the brick border. So looking at its horizontal dimension, it's 12.5 metres being eaten into twice by the brick border of 25 centimetres. 12.5 metres take away 2 lots of 25 centimetres gives us a horizontal border of 12. Now looking vertically, we can do the same thing with the 10.5. Clearly it's being eaten into both sides by the brick border. That's 2 lots of 25 centimetres eating in to our 10.5 metres. So that's going to take us down to 10 metres. And this area is clearly the same as the white area here. Now let's look at how many slabs we need for that. Now you could say, which orientation should I do these slabs? 30 times 20, do they go vertically or do they go horizontally? Now my answer would be, clearly the 12 is the horizontal one, and that's going to fit nicely with the 30, much more nicely than the 10 fitting with the 30. So let's do them horizontal. So focusing first on the 12, we've got 12 metres, we've got slabs of 30 centimetres lengthwise horizontally. So therefore 12 metres divided by 30 centimetres will give us 40 slabs. Doing the same thing with the 10, this time looking vertically, we've got 10 metres, each slab is worth 20 centimetres vertically, so 10 metres divided by 20 will give us a total of 50 slabs in the vertical dimension. 40 times 50 will give us 2,000 slabs in total. Now let's look at the brick border. We can split it into 2 lots of this horizontal dimension for the top and bottom, and 2 lots of this dimension for each side. Focusing first on this top and bottom. This top and bottom, we've got 1,250 centimetres. We're dividing that by 25 because the bricks are 25 by 25. Now hopefully you can see that that's the same as 50. But remember we've got both the bottom and the top, so we do 2 lots of 50 to give us 100 bricks. Now let's do the sides. Now in this case, remember, we don't need to do this top corner and this bottom corner because they've already been filled by when we did our 12.5 on the top and bottom. In fact, we're just looking at this area in between my 2 blue dashes. What is that dimension? Well, essentially it's 10.5, again eaten into by 25 each side. In that case, this distance between the 2 blue dashes is 10 metres. So we've got 10 metres, 25 centimetres per brick. That must mean that we've got 40 bricks. Double that for each side. We end up with 80 bricks. So now the numbers that are important, the 2,000 slabs, and these numbers for the bricks for the border, we add them all up, we get 2,180. And that's our correct answer for this question. Now on to question 37. Here we've just got to take the statements one by one and prove which one is not true. So let's circle that. Taking the first one, breakfasts of toast and jam have never been more popular than 2006. Well, here we have toast and jam. It was 5% in 2006 and it's 5% till Kingdom Come in 2012. So overall, they have never been more popular than in 2006 because it's never bigger than 5%. So that one is true. Looking at B, the popularity of breakfasts that include porridge overtook the popularity of breakfasts that include eggs in 2012. Well, let's look at 2011 first of all. Porridge was at 30%, eggs were at 20% plus 15%. So that's 35%. Now let's look at what happened in 2012. Porridge goes up to 35%, but eggs, 10% and 15%, go down to 25%. Porridge has overtaken eggs, so B is true. C, the popularity of breakfasts that include porridge or cereals has gone up 10 percentage points year on year for the last 4 years shown in the table. So we're looking at this last 4 years over here. Now we're looking at porridge or cereals. It starts at 40, it then goes 50, 25 plus 25, then goes 60, then goes 70. So that one is true. It goes up 10 percentage points each time. D, in every year between 2006 and 2012, the popularity of breakfasts that include fresh fruit was the same as the popularity of breakfasts that included marmalade. So let's look at the ones that included marmalade. It's only this one over here. Let's look at those that include fresh fruit. It's this one over here. So let's review the question. In every year between 2006 and 2012, the popularity of breakfasts that include fresh fruit was the same as the popularity of breakfasts that include marmalade. Well, here we've got 5% and fresh fruit was at 10%. Well, that's not the case. 10%, 15%, that's not the case either. It starts to become true after this point, but remember the statement is all about 2006 to 2012. So D is not true and therefore it is the answer. On to question 38. Question 38 is a bit more of a simple one as long as you let go of the obsession that you might have with exactly quantifying something. In this case, we're given an example pie chart. We're saying that the chef or the chief taster wants to increase the amount of banana by 10%. So this black part is going to go up by 10%. And the orange, the grey part, is going to go down by 10%. Now let's think about what might happen to the apple. If this big chunk, this big banana is going to go up by 10%, the orange, this smaller chunk, is going to go down by 10%. Clearly, the overall effect of this 10% increase is going to outweigh the overall effect of this 10% decrease because it starts from a bigger chunk. Therefore, overall, the black and the grey parts of the chart total are going to represent bigger amount. That's because the 10% of the banana increase is going to outweigh the 10% reduction in the orange. Therefore, the apple is going to get compressed and therefore it will represent a smaller slice. So overall, we're looking for a pie chart with a bigger amount of black, a smaller amount of grey and a smaller amount of white. The one that fits that is B. Here we have a question about different types of people in society and the double punishment that they might receive because they've subscribed to a profession in which they are expected to behave at a higher standard. So for example, it boils down to privileged people must understand that with rewards come responsibilities, including the responsibility to behave in a more exemplary way than those in ordinary walks of life. The one that closely follows that principle is B. A police chief who accepts a bribe deserves more blame, more punishment than the criminal who offers the bribe. That's because the police chief is one of these exemplary privileged people and therefore the author is saying should be double punished because they have accepted that with rewards come responsibilities and therefore they should accept more blame for that account of things. So B is the correct answer here. On to question 40. Now this is quite a ludicrous argument that essentially revolves around saying that the only intelligent beings must be made of some biological substrate, despite the fact that the biological substrate is obviously made up of the atoms and elements and everything else that everything is made of. There's nothing special particularly about flesh and blood in itself, but nonetheless this is what the author is arguing. And therefore it says that artificial intelligence can never be a thing. It can never be conscious fully because it's simply not made of flesh and blood. Now the flaw in that argument is saying that, well, this author's looking at what already exists and drawing conclusions from that about the future. And clearly what already exists might not encompass all of the possibilities. So if we look through the answer options, A, it assumes that just because the only things we know to possess consciousness are biological organisms, they're the only things that could do. That is the flaw. The author is looking at what we know already, and just because we know all of those things are flesh and blood, those are the only things that possess consciousness, doesn't necessarily mean that they're the only things that will do in the future. So A is the best flaw of this argument. Question 41. In this case, we're talking about historical fiction and novelists and how they complement historians themselves. In this case, it's all a rebuttal to this first sentence. Some readers think that there is nothing to learn from historical fiction. Essentially, the author is trying to say that there is something to learn from historical fiction. We can learn about the emotions, the feelings, the speculation that might be happening in those blank spaces of history. So the author is overall trying to say that historical fiction and historical novelists are not entirely redundant. They actually serve a purpose. Now, if we look through which ones of these are the best approximation of that conclusion, we can see most areas of history were never documented. That's a passing statement. It's not really what the author is trying to drive home to the audience. We can never know exactly what happened in the past. Well, that goes without saying. Again, not the main reason this author is sat down to write this passage. See, historical novels can add to our understanding of the past. This is what the author is saying. He's saying that they're not entirely useless. Historical fiction is important and it can teach us something. So C is the correct answer here. If we just go on to D and E very quickly, not everyone thinks we can learn something from historical fiction. Well, clearly that is sort of what is implied in this first sentence, but that's not really the reason why this author's sat down to write. And finally, E, the work of the historical novelist is not just about making things up. Well, that is true. They're saying that actually it's about speculation, learning facts, etc. But that's not really the reason, again, why this author has written this passage. Think of it as the author's trying to persuade you of something. In this case, they're trying to show you that historical novelists, historical fiction, is important and it can teach you something. And that best fits with C. Question 42 is quite a weird question again. Again, it's this combination of points, and we're looking for the smallest points total that is not possible for an individual student. So there's no point starting up here at 37, we may as well start down here at 22 and work by trial and error upwards. You can't work this one out purely based on looking at the points and thinking about it really deeply, because these point totals that they've given you are entirely arbitrary. So looking first at 22, how can we achieve that using these scores? Well, we can get two lots of 5, that will take us to 10, and then maybe the person wins their last race. That will take us to 22. So that is possible. 26, however, no matter how much you do it, you can't work out a way that you can achieve 26 points. So already that fits the definition. This is the smallest points total that they've given you that is not possible for an individual student to score, so therefore B is correct. And there's no point in this question going on to looking at C, D and E, because frankly these could work, they could not work. It doesn't really matter though, because they're not smaller than 26. So there's really not any point. If you can't prove 26, then that's the answer. Here we've got some data interpretation. We're looking for toys which have increased in price more than 100%. That means that they have more than doubled their price. Just put it into those terms, it will help you with the question. Let's go through one by one. 18, or 19 rather, roughly, to about 200. Clearly that is more than doubled in price. So let's start ticking the ones that have. $79.99 to $225, that's more than doubled in price. $24.99 to $50, that's more than doubled in price, because if we double $24.99, we'll end up with something very close but not quite 50. 50 is more than double. $29.99 to $59.99, if we double $29.99, we would actually end up with $59.98. So again, it's 1 penny less than $59.99, so that has more than doubled. Looking at the other answer options, we don't really achieve another one until further on down the line. 54 doubled clearly will be in the hundreds, so that's not more than double, 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 until we reach this one down here, Sylvanian families. That has more than doubled, because roughly 80 doubled is going to be 160. We're all the way up at 192. Now let's think a little bit more about these ones. Roughly 80 doubled would be about 160. That's obviously more than this, so this hasn't more than doubled. And 132.99 doubled will get very close to 265.98. In fact, it will be 265.98. So this hasn't more than doubled. So now we've reached the end, we just add up the amount of ticks we've got. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So therefore the answer is C. Here is a classic business question. We're told about the number of items sold and the total monthly income. Remember, the total monthly income is the product of the number sold multiplied by the price per unit. Now we're told that the price per unit increased at the beginning of one of these 6 months. Now if it didn't increase, we'd expect the exact same pattern in both graphs. Now it's almost the same. However, here if you look at April, you can see here that the number of units sold actually decreased compared to February. However, the total monthly income increased. That must mean that in April, the price per unit increased, so that we sold less, but because each one was worth more, we ended up with more income. So April is our answer here. Now, question 45 introduces an interesting fact about the UK. It says that we're the most sampled or surveyed population there is, and actually there's survey fatigue. People are getting fed up with these surveys and therefore they're becoming inaccurate. So the conclusion of this passage is that more surveying does not necessarily lead to more accurate results. So if we look through the answer options, the one that fits with that is D. More polling does not necessarily give a more accurate picture of popular opinion because people are going to get worn out. So D fits with the conclusion in this passage. Moving on to question 46. Now question 46, we're looking at different tablets, we're looking at different regimes. It's worth comparing before and after. Before we were on 300 tablets, we were on 6 per day. That must mean that we lasted 50 days on that box. Now afterwards, we've got this interesting mix of 2 lots of 6 tablets followed by 5 lots of 4 tablets in a single week. Now it's worth considering a week as the unit therefore. We've got 2 lots of 6 in a week, that's 12, plus 5 lots of 4 in a week, that's 20. So overall, 32 tablets are being taken per week. How many weeks will that last then? Well, it's not quite 10 weeks because that takes up to 320 tablets. So therefore we've got 9 weeks plus a bit of a remainder. Now here we do 9 times 32. That gives us 288. That's how many tablets we've used after the 9 weeks. Now clearly we've got 12 remaining. Now it doesn't specify which days of the week we have to take these 6 tablets or 4 tablets. So in order to really maximize our box, let's just say the first 3 days of that extra little part of the week after the 288th tablet, we're going to feed the dog 4 tablets each day. There's no requirement to fit in the 6 tablets. That could be for later on in the week. To maximize the box, we're going to give them 4 tablets per day after this point. So we end up with an additional 3 days. Because 3 lots of 4 is 12, that'll take us up to the total of 300 tablets in the box. So overall, we've got 9 weeks and 3 days. Now we just have to put that in terms of days. 9 weeks is 63 days, plus the 3 days gives us 66 days. Comparing before to after, we've eked out an extra 16 days. So C is the correct answer here. Now looking at question 47, this one's all about private security. It's saying that the private security shouldn't be put totally in the hands of private industry because we need some government oversight because it's so important. We need to protect these assets, whether they're people or objects. It's so important. It needs to be run by an impartial, trustworthy source. Now the implicit assumption of that is that the government is a better impartial, trustworthy source than the private sector. So the assumption here is that the government is a better role player in this situation than the private industry. The one that fits closely with that is E. The government agency staff are less susceptible to corrupt or unfair practices when regulating the workers than those of the private security companies. In other words, it's saying that government people are better. And that's sort of the answer behind, the assumption behind this whole argument, saying that actually we could put it in private companies' hands, but why would we want to do that? Because it's so important, we need to keep it in government hands to make sure that it's impartial and trustworthy. That implies, that assumes that actually government agency staff are intrinsically less susceptible to corrupt or unfair practices. So E is the assumption here. Here we've got another one of those annoying backward calculating train times, film times kind of thing. Here we've got a film that starts at 19:20, but we said, oh, we can be a bit late to that. We can be 5 minutes late. We don't want to miss more than the first 5 minutes. So to give us the best case scenario in terms of the latest time that we should leave home, we should aim to get there at the latest by 19:25. Remember that it takes 5 minutes to walk to the cinema. So actually we should be getting to the train station at 19:20. Now, in order to get to the train station at 19:20, we need to look at this departures list. Now, clearly the cinema is in X Bay, and that's arriving at 8:02 and then every 40 minutes until this time late at night. So really what we want to do is work out all the times where departures will set off from X Bay. In other words, when this sort of train will leave X Bay. In other words, when it will arrive at X Bay. So if we look at that, we can start writing out a list like this. Well, there's one at 8:02. There's then one at 8:42. There's then one at 9:22. And then there's one at 10:02. And we can carry on doing that process until eventually we get to 16:42 or 18:42, 6:42 p.m. In this situation, another 40 minutes after that would be 19:22. And clearly we need to get to the train station at 19:20 in order to make this film. So 18:42 is the last time that we can afford to get there. Now let's look at the time that this train takes between B-Town and X-Bay. Well, it's 37 minutes. From 7:25 to 8:02, that's going to be the same because every 40 minutes the same thing happens. So in order to get to X-Bay at 18:42, we have to arrive at B-Town 37 minutes before that. In other words, we need to get there at 18:05. Now remember that it's a 14-minute walk away from the station, so all we need to do now is just take off 14 minutes from this, and that leaves us with our answer of B, 17:51. On to our penultimate question. This one is fairly straightforward. It's talking about human nature, and actually the whole point is that the author's saying this is an irrelevant argument. There's no point saying whether something's natural or unnatural because it simply depends on what things are normal or in that society or not. So the whole point of what this author's saying is that natural or unnatural cannot be used to justify certain moral actions. Now the one that fits with that principle is A, the fact that human beings have a tendency to be competitive, naturally competitive you might say, does not mean that this should be encouraged, does not mean that we should influence and decide the morality of our behaviour based on that natural tendency. And that is essentially the same thing as what this author is saying in the passage, which is why A is the correct answer. And finally, question 50, this one we can try to do by inspection. Here we're looking at the proportion of gold medals that each team won. And what I would encourage you to do is just glance your eyes over it first of all. Let's look at the first three entries. Looking at Amber, Emerald and Garnet, we can see that Amber got 8 gold medals in a total of about 21, looking at it. That's quite a high proportion. That's about a bit more than a third. Looking at Emerald, we've got 5 gold medals, but this time, again, we've got 21 events. So 5 in 21, that's not too good. Next, we've got 6 in 22. Now, clearly that's a little bit better. So already we can see that Amber is probably the best, at least from our first 3 rows. Emerald is probably the worst, and Garnet maybe is a little bit better. Looking at our answer options, that must mean that A is incorrect. Here we've got Emerald better than Garnet. Let's cross that out. Now let's look at B. Here we've got Amber, the best, Emerald, and then Garnet. This looks like a good distribution, so let's keep that for now. Looking at C, Amber is seen to be on par with Emerald. That's not the case looking at the table, so we can cross that one out. Looking at D, we've got Amber being the best, then Emerald down here, then Garnet a little bit higher. That seems to be quite good. And looking at E, again, we've got a similar sort of thing. Now, in order to help us sort of distinguish these things, Let's zoom in at D and E. The main difference between them is how high up this emerald bar is compared to the amber bar. Now if we go back to our calculations, amber won 8 out of a total of 21 events. We said that that was about a third. Looking at emerald, we've got 5 out of a total of 21 events. That's about a quarter. Now if we look at E, we can see that the emerald bar is less than half of the amber bar. Now a quarter is not less than half of a third, so already we know that E is incorrect. Now to distinguish between B and D, you can see here that the sapphire bar is much larger in B than D. Let's look at the sapphire. 11 golds, 8 silvers, 9 bronze. Adding them all up, we've clearly got 28 events, 11 of which were gold. So again, it's about a third. So actually, amber and sapphire should be roughly on par, not, as B is showing, sapphire being much greater than amber. So we can cross out B, and we're left with our answer of D, where amber, emerald and garnet are in the correct order. The emerald bar is in proportion to the amber bar relative to what we calculated, and the amber bar is in proportion to the sapphire bar, again based on what we calculated. So be objective for these questions. Don't just go into it blindly calculating things. Run your eyes over it, make some conclusions about the shape of the graph, and then compare individual bars if you need to. And that's how I would answer these questions. So the answer here is D. I hope you found that useful, and I'll see you again next time.